Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey adapters, welcome back. Today our guest is Ted Ridgway Watt. Ted is a founder of Teraloop Ltd and was appointed CEO in 2014. With a background in electrical engineering and computational methods, Ted's previous appointments have included senior technology strategy roles with the government in the United Kingdom and Jersey. Ted is an experienced technologist and communicator. Ted will explain the challenges we face with increased renewable energy usage, how much more storage we will need, the lack of an economic incentive to store it, and why we can't just distribute solar cells around the planet. Hey Ted, welcome to the show.
Hi Doug, pleased to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I am checking in with folks before we jump in and start talking about batteries, which I'm very curious on what you guys are doing. What's going on with COVID-19 with you? How's it impacting your work?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, obviously it's had a huge effect over the first half of this year. But in terms of affecting my company's work, actually, we've managed okay. It's disrupted supply chains. But more importantly, it's disrupted the energy sector's plans to move on with new projects. And it's also somewhat disrupted the capital markets as well for investment in new projects and products. So I think, the implications and the impacts will go on for at least another year. But I'm pleased to say energy is one of those things that we all need, and we will find a way through it.
Okay, before we really start talking about the mechanics of the energy storage question, what is Teraloop? What is this group that you work with?
Teraloop, well, we're a startup in energy storage, really driven initially when we founded in 2014 by an understanding that we can't switch off combustion technology until we can store renewable energy. Obviously, the situation is a lot more complicated than that, and perhaps we'll touch on that shortly at the beginning of this. But we've really recognized that storage is the key to unlocking renewable energy in future. And obviously, sorry, Doug, what we're talking about today really touches on what we might call the energy transition. And I'm sure a lot of the viewers are aware of it, but those who aren't, it's talking about just decarbonizing the energy sector. So the transition to renewable energy and all of the challenges that come with that.
Okay, maybe we can give a reality check here too. There are some people that think if you just invest and distribute solar cells around the world, you just create enough of them, give them to everyone, that would solve our problems. But that's not really the case, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, as people have said that, 500,000 square meters, kilometers rather, of solar cells would be enough to power the world. And that's just 1/18 of the area of the Sahara Desert, which, let's face it, is hardly overutilized. So, of course, the issue is that we actually need to generate and supply the energy where and when it's needed. So, I mean, even if you imagine dividing the world into equal longitudes and having these sort of mega solar cells, there's another problem, which is that you still have to get it around the place. And this isn't all about generation, Doug. It's about actually the transmission and distribution part of it, the infrastructure. I mean, this is based on the infrastructure that's here in the developed world is based on 100-year-old concept of a power station, and then thinner and thinner copper until you get to someone's house, and so on. I mean, just in the UK here, we have enough conducting material, enough copper, if you like, in the transmission and distribution system to reach the moon and back twice. So we can't just replace that. And there are other issues with solar cells as well, which I'm sure we'll touch on. So yeah, the answer is not that we can simply power the world with great big acres of solar photovoltaics.
Well, I guess the more I think about it, you have to choreograph all these different parts of the system, and they have to kind of be working in unison. And so the batteries, if the sun's not out, those solar cells are not going to be working. But how much of an issue is the grid in all this? Is you'd mentioned we have some of these old technologies, but is the grid ready to even take renewable? And even if we had a proper battery storage too?
Yeah, I mean there are many studies that recognize or attempt to show how much renewable energy we need as a proportion of our generation capacity, so the penetration level. The problem is that in the past, you have these great big turbines that driven by coal or gas or oil or whatever, or nuclear, and these are simply big rotating machines, and they rotate at the same speed. And if something happens, if an interconnect goes down, or a big part of the distribution network or transmission network goes down, these big spinning machines keep spinning because they are massive, and that inertia keeps the frequency stable, and that keeps our equipment working, critical equipment. It keeps our domestic, our consumer appliances safe. It keeps hospital equipment safe, and so on. So the concept of grid inertia is actually quite important, and you don't get that with batteries. You don't get that with solar cells and batteries. You have to kind of synthesize that. You have to create it, and so inertia is becoming a more and more important part of what we might call grid flexibility, which is saying it's not about the total amount of energy, it's actually delivering the power in a safe and reliable way to people that need it. And that's not just the developed world. It's not just where we've had centralized generation in the past. It's about the developing world. It's about the 600 million people in Southeast Asia who don't have access to safe and secure power for education, for healthcare, and so on. So really, I mean, one of the key themes for today and my thesis is really that the energy transition and energy storage isn't really about energy. It's about storage for power, because that is what unlocks access to renewable energy.
So is it true that there's really not an economic case for stored energy at the moment?
Um, that's a really really good point, Doug. Um, if we look at say that the latest auction prices for solar and wind, the lowest prices so far in Masdar in the Middle East, it's about the low $20 per megawatt hour, or the highest price auctions we have are for offshore wind power in the North Sea, and that's about, I'm just converting pounds to dollars, call it $75. Let's take that as the worst case. If you had a 50 megawatt wind turbine array, and you wanted to match that with, say, 10%, 20% of its capacity, so you had 10 megawatts and 10 megawatt hours of storage, that's going to cost you $10 million. It doesn't matter what Elon Musk says. It doesn't matter what the latest prices are. Genuinely, it will cost you that. There'll be the batteries and the interconnects and the inverters and all of this. It's going to cost you $10 million. And you're going to get, what did I say, $75 per megawatt hour. You got 10 of those, so that's $750 per day. So you're not going to be making an investment of $10 million based on getting 750 back per day. And it's even worse for solar. Now and so that's the developed world. I mean, there are other reasons that you would try to extend the capacity of a renewable asset for a bit longer in the evening, but that's very much going to be only driven by local regulation. But generally, there is no real economic case yet for bulk storage or time shift of renewable energy, because the prices are so low. And the prices are so low because we have oversupply. And as long as we keep combustion technology online, the prices are going to be really low.
So, is there regulation that it could help with this? And are there countries, are there cities actually doing this where they're encouraging energy storage?
Yeah, it's a known problem. I mean, it's known by international and national groups, and it's variously called sustainability for finance or finance for sustainability. And they recognize that this is a problem that can't be, you can't incentivize, you can't interfere with capital markets to buy assets. And the long term solution is going to be in regulation, in bringing in regulation that means that storage is a necessity and that it is correctly remunerated, that the right instruments are there. And long term, that means that storage for our future energy supply is going to be done on a service based level. So energy stored as a service, if you like.
Well, what do you mean
And
by
that's
that? Well, I guess I don't understand. What do you mean by a service?
it simply means that the capital expenditure is going to be done by, maybe financial bodies
Okay.
rather than by the energy sector, and
Okay.
the energy sector will then pay through regulated mechanisms.
All right. So, could you talk a little bit about just storage technology and the work that you're doing? But when I think of battery storage, I think of lithium batteries, and you hear,
Mm.
oh, look down in South America, there's all these resources, and it'll be the future. But what really is going to happen there? Is there enough of that? I mean, the technology that you're working on.
Well, Doug, as a quick heads up for next week, I think we'll be talking about
Okay,
that
we'll
in
dig into
more
that next
detail.
more next
I don't
week.
want
And
to. I want to keep our powder dry for that.
okay,
Um, well, let's just take a look at what storage does. Really, just to kind of divide, to sort of look at the taxonomy of storage. Um, what you need with storage is to deal with all of the mismatch of supply and demand with renewable energy. And actually, we're going to need a lot more storage in future. I mean, Bloomberg reckon maybe 1,500 times more by 2040, and Christian Breyer and the Energy Watch Group and Lapinrantu University reckon 4,000 times more storage. And that is all about making sure that the little fluctuations you get from renewable energy, which might be a cloud passing in front of the sun, or it might be just this lack of inertia in the system. The storage has to actually ride through those events, and we're going to need by 2040 to 2050 most of the even a lot more storage. So 30% of the energy we generate will pass through storage, just to make sure it's, if you like, buffered. Now, um, some of that, so that daily storage I'm talking about is between sort of instantaneous and say 8 hours. So some of it is about commercial storage, so rooftop solar to make sure the lights in the shop stay on. But a lot of it is actually about really short-term stuff like um, containing frequency fluctuations, about making sure that voltage doesn't flicker, making sure that you can reinforce the capacity of local generation assets. Now, we're looking in the future really at three different types of technology. Um, I'm going to discount. I'm going to discount hydro, simply because I mean, hydro makes up a lot of storage at the moment, but it's only about 2% of our generation capacity, so it's not a lot. Um, the problem with hydro is we can't build out hydro just wherever we like, and there are two reasons for that. One is, it depends on geography and terrain. We know the stories about the various huge damming projects around the world. Now, it's great, hydro storage, because it can store seasonal. On the negative side, seasonal storage is pretty bad, because the longer you store an asset, the less value it has. The time you store it, the greater the value it has. So we're looking at a huge range of technologies, and batteries are where it's at in the normal conversation, in the normal public narrative. We're very familiar with batteries. They appear in electric vehicles. We see them in limited scale storage projects. US has actually been really good with progressive projects and innovative projects in battery technology and indeed in flywheels, beacon power as an example. And that's been done through local regulation to make sure that you can make this economic case. But the issue with lithium is whatever the US geographical survey says, I mean, we have a few decades worth of lithium, but we've got a few decades more still of oil. So it's a complex argument to make. It's always going to come down to extraction cost, the availability of the material, and the recycling of it. And lithium is great for electric vehicles because you charge them once a day, more or less, and you discharge them once a day. If you start to use them in the most important part of keeping the grid stable and grid flexibility, you're talking about charging and discharging many times a day. And there have been many studies, which we probably won't be able to go into today, which show that actually ideal storage to keep our energy supply stable is storage that you can of an optimized capacity that you can charge and discharge several or many times a day. And lithium's not great at that. If you start to discharge and charge it at high rates, it gets warm. When it gets warm, it deteriorates. Let me give you an example. I was working closely with a very, very well-known petrochemical company. They're shifting from molecules to electrons, so they're trying to increase their generation capacity or their energy capacity to 40% electrons. And that means that they need to start looking at storage. So they're coming up with, say, holistic sort of whole energy solutions, turnkey energy solutions, if you like. And that's a bit of petrochemicals because that's their business. That's what they've got. That's their asset, the supply chain. They've got the real estate. They've got the forecourts. So they're adding solar to that and power to gas and batteries. And this company was trying to roll out these solutions in India, actually in Bangalore, which is a pretty high functioning, a well-developed part of India, but they're still getting 1 to 2 second dropouts 20 times a day. Their lithium batteries were lasting 6 months. And that's, you're not going to be going back to Best Buy for a lithium battery after 6 months. It is, it's an expensive business. And so lithium is not the only solution. It is a really good solution, but the key thing here is, I'm not talking with my Teraloop hat on today at all, but lithium needs companion technologies to make it work. And there are still question marks over some of the other chemistries involved in it. So we talk quite often about cobalt that's used in lithium batteries at the moment. And that, of course, has an even greater geopolitical stress on it than lithium, which, as you know, is there are a couple of places in the world where lithium brine is processed in bulk, and cobalt is obviously worse. So there's a lot of research going on at the moment into alternatives, but that's just research, and we're really at an inflection point now where there's enough capacity already in renewable energy to significantly reduce our combustion and our consequent emissions, and we need to be really ahead of the game with batteries and other storage. And it's really not quite there yet. I think it's still lagging lithium technology. I mean, there are some really exciting new things, nano coatings for the electrical parts. That means that they'll be able to recycle maybe 60,000 times instead of 8,000 times. But we're still stuck with two key issues, which is resource availability and recycling. And that's going to be even more important in future. At the moment, we don't have the technology to recycle, to reuse lithium in, for example, EV batteries. And so EV batteries, I think, over the next 20 years will dominate they will become the big gravitational pull for lithium. And I would say rightly so. As I said earlier, lithium sits really well in a car battery because of the consistency of it and the high power density of it and the the predictable use patterns.
I know we're going to talk, details in our next conversation, but I guess more broadly, stepping back, you think about some of the climate change discussions out there and what you're doing and what renewable energy policy is doing out there. How does it help? How does it hurt? Is it even relevant to what you're doing when you think about the outcomes of the Paris Climate Agreement? It's like, well, people like you down in the trenches, it's gonna make those things happen, right? I mean, so is that even something you kind of think about? Does it influence like what you're doing?
Well, I mean, just personally speaking, we are on a mission to provide a solution that is needed to complement these other technologies. In terms of overall strategy, I would say there isn't really a battery strategy because actually there's a really buoyant market for it and it is pretty much commoditized. There is a strategy for power to gas, which is a really good way of storing sort of daily, superdiurnal, so weekly and seasonal. We do need to look at regulation, and here we come across the sort of the age-old problem of public sector creating the policy, private sector responding in some way, and regulation there to try to be the third part of the triangle to sort of connect the two, if you like. The issue we find is that the most of the utilities in the world are fairly resistant and fairly risk averse, and they're not making investments in the technologies that we will need in the future, not to the level that perhaps they should be. Most of the investments we see are, for example, somewhat optimistic investments in clean coal, as a recent one from Finland, or in time of use software. So an easy win, just reduce the cost or the amount of energy used. But the problem with that is that it pleases the shareholders. It's good at the AGM to have a quick win by some software that consumers can use. The problem is that doesn't solve the issue in the long term of actually getting the energy to where it's needed, the right energy to where it's needed. So I think the industry, and particularly the utilities, should be taking a bolder position when it comes to risk. I know it's difficult, but they need to take a leadership position in this, because government will never take a leadership position in technology, and neither will regulation. They just enable us.
Well, Ted, we are actually at the end of our episode here. We went through that very quickly, and I am looking forward that we're actually talk about the products that you're working on in our next conversation. I think it's next week, and I appreciate you coming on. And I want to bring you to Just Chatting, just check in with you for a couple of minutes. We're going to end the episode here, but thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Doug.
All right, you hold it right there, and I'll be right back.